I think of know who I am, Jody Heaston. I used to be the interpretive naturalist. That's how I got my first job in the DNR back in 1997 was the boathouse at Owachi State Park. And on rainy days, I took a nap on the floor. So I always tell people that. But then that year, the naturalist was a gentleman, and he always would walk around the lake carrying a string that went through a Kool-Aid bowl. Okay, he'd walk around the lake with this like Kool-Aid bowl purse. And I always watched him, because I was sitting in the boathouse, I just had to watch the lake, and I go, one day I said, what are you doing? He goes, I'm just trying to find anything that moves, and I'm going to talk about it tonight at the campfire. And so I was like, oh, okay, so whatever moves around the lake. And then the second year, or that year, I said, hey, next year I'm going to get your job. And he goes, you are? And I go, oh yeah, I'm going to be a naturalist. And he didn't apply the following year, and then I became the naturalist. The next year, and I was at Owachi 2 seasons as a seasonal naturalist. I got to meet, Jim and all those masters from the state park naturalists those years. And then I became full-time at Mound State Park. So if you ever go to Mound, that nature center is my baby. So I worked there about 5 years, and then I quit for a couple years, had to have my own babies, and then the DNR actually called me and said, hey, we have a position we think you'd be really good at, the volunteer coordinating position, and it also includes Indiana Master Naturalist. Now, volunteers I could deal with. I dealt with them at Mounds. I said, oh, okay. I go, I don't know about this Master Naturalist program. I go, what is this about? That kind of intimidates me. And then, actually, that's the part of my job I like the most. Well, milkweed. Those that know me know I love monarchs. Okay, I love them. I'm one of those people that tag monarchs every year. And once you get into monarchs, you start getting into the milkweed. And boy, milkweed is completely fascinating. I mean, this program I do for our Master Naturalist class at Owachi, I do a 3-hour program just on milkweed. And that's all we talk about for 3 hours. So, and it's something that I tell people is, especially some of the old farmers, older farmers, the generation, milkweed was considered a weed. It was get it out of the field because it would just spread and it caused issues. And so a lot of these older generation farmers, that's what then they taught the next generation. But it's a really fascinating plant. It's native. And so we're going to talk about all the neat things about, sorry, my kids keep texting me, all the neat things about milkweed, so that when you talk to people about monarchs, and then you talk about milkweed, you can tell them all the neat things about it, all right? Okay, so, reason we're looking to milkweed, we all know, it's the host plant for our monarch. And so here is the latest graph when it comes to the estimate population of the monarchs. So you can see the very last one right here, that's this past winter, 24-25. These numbers are hectares. So what scientists do is they take airplanes, helicopters, they go over the spots where the monarchs have migrated to in Mexico. All right, I'll put my phone down if it starts beeping again. I'll get mad. Okay, so when they're in Mexico, they're going over these areas where the monarchs have hibernated. It's green forest and it's orange, and that's where the monarchs are. So then they can estimate by the hectares how many monarchs are there. So 1 hectare is 2.5 acres in our version, because that's how we fill things, okay? And it's estimated that 2.5 acres, or that 1 hectare, can be up to 50 million monarchs. So that's how they're estimating. So every hectare, they're just saying, there's maybe 50 million here, 50 million here. So these are, again, the numbers here are the hectares. So this past winter, they only found 1.79 hectares of monarchs. That's all they found, okay? If you go back, you can see what they think to maintain the population should be around 5 or 6 hectares. But you can see traditionally, these past few years, we've been really under the 3 mark. And then right here is the summer of 13 and 14. That's when the whole monarch craze began. Everybody became very worried about monarchs. Oh my gosh, they're gonna go extinct. Scientists believe they'll probably never go extinct, but we may lose that big, huge amount of migration back and forth. I mean, we'll still have maybe a few going back, but we won't see that big, huge migration. So one of the things we have to consider is where the milkweed is growing, okay? So here we have our milkweed corridor. And we have between the white lines from Texas up, that's where the monarchs are migrating from Mexico north. That's the corridor, okay? So in that corridor is where we need the most milkweed habitat as possible. The most, all right? That's the corridor. So, and as you can see, it goes right through Indiana. And a lot of you, if you are northwest, you're in the corridor. And not to say the southeast isn't. You still, you already get your monarchs, but this is the main corridor. And they take it because this is the spring flyways, just like the birds migrate, they have flyways, and our monarchs pretty much follow the same flyways. You have the jet stream, the air currents, so monarchs and the birds pretty much follow the same flyways. So you can see right here, this is one of the flyways right here, and that's the corridor, right in this area, okay, it goes through Indiana. So looking at that corridor, one really interesting fact is the Midwest, the Corn Belt, that yellow circle. Okay, well first we'll talk about this circle right here is where our generations 1 and 2 go. So we need a lot of milkweed in that first circle. So our generation, generation 4s coming up from Mexico are trying to find milkweed to lay their eggs on. So when they come from Mexico in the spring, generation 4s, they have to find milkweed right here to make the generation 1s. It's very important to have milkweed in that circle. So then you have generation 1s and 2s. I'm not going to go through all this with you because that's a whole other 3-hour program. But basically, they keep going generation up. When they get to this circle, okay, this is where we start seeing the monarchs. Typically, we start seeing monarchs. I always tell people 4th of July, fireworks. Then you start seeing the butterflies. Okay, that's usually, maybe that's for me up in northern Indiana. That's when I start really seeing them. I start seeing the monarchs. So I traditionally see probably late generation 2s and generation 3s in July. So generation 3s obviously have to find milkweed to lay their eggs for our generation 4s, which are then going to fly back down to Mexico, right? So that yellow circle right there is estimated through the research of scientists, through the tagging of monarchs. That yellow circle is estimated that over 50 to 60% of the monarchs that make it to Mexico are from that yellow circle. 60 up to 60%, 50 to 60%, that's over half of the monarchs come from that circle. Okay, and that's part of us. So it's super important that we teach people how important this milkweed is. And I loved Dawn, Oasis. I preach that too. So at my house, my husband's an engineer. Complete polar opposite of me. Polar opposite. He likes a clean, perfect yard. Everything I preach against, okay? Clean, perfect, no weed, and then there's me. So he has compromised with me, and I have wild areas, I have milkweed areas, but he calls them my zones. So they're my oasis, okay? If anything goes out of the zone, it's mowed over. But I have lots of zones of milkweed, okay? All different kinds. And anyone can. I go, if I can make my husband allow me to have zones, anyone can have a zone of milkweed, okay? Or oasis, as Dawn said. But this is the circle that we need to really make sure, because in order for the migration to continue, we need that generation 4 monarchs, and they need the milkweed in that circle, okay? So here's a common milkweed flower, okay? It has a cluster of flowers, and some milkweed clusters can have up to 50 to 60 to 80 flowers in a cluster, all right? And the neat thing about milkweed is pollination. We're going to dig into that pollination, and I'm happy I'm Master Naturalist, so I can talk a little bit more technical. But in order to understand the pollination of milkweed, which is so fascinating, you'll never look at a milkweed flower again the same. Because I'm always out there, I'm so nerdy, I'm looking at ants and bees and seeing if they have the pollen sac on them, and we'll talk about that. But in order to understand it, you have to understand the different parts of the milkweed flower. So when you look at a milkweed flower, you have these hoods right here. This is a hood, and you have the horn, okay? So what the insects are doing is they're going to this hood and trying to get the nectar out of the hood, all right? So they're walking around each hood right there, all right? And then we have these corpusculum, which are these little black dots, which I'm going to show you a little bit what that is. And they have these little slits called the somatic slits. So in order to pollinate milkweed, a pollen sac has to go into that slit, okay? So it's pretty amazing. So I just wanted to show those. And then here's another kind of a view of it. Again, just showing the hood and the horn. And of course, these are the petals they're not sepals, they're petals of the flower. And that's what makes Asclepias unique. All milkweed has the same type of flower. Okay, some milkweed have opposite leaves, or they have alternate leaves too, but the flower is what makes an Asclepias. They all have the same type of flower. No other plant has this kind of flower, only Asclepias. Okay. So now we're going to dig into the pollination, because that's what's to me so fascinating. So here we have the corpusculum right here, and there's a pollen sac. So this right here, and we're going to go on some other slides, but this means that an insect was walking along, going from hood to hood, walking along. It stepped on one of these black dots. These little black corpusculum, okay, actually are kind of like clothespins, in that as soon as they're touched just right, they close right on the insect's leg. Bam! Okay? Closes on them. The insect then moves its leg. When it moves its leg, it will pull it out and then step on the insect's leg. Okay, so right here. Oops. So here's an insect leg. That corpusculum is stuck on the leg because it's latched onto the leg. And you have that pollen sac. It's just a little sac full of pollen. All right, it's typical, not what we're thinking of. We're thinking of pollen in the air, flying around. This is actually contained in a sac. Okay, and so here's another picture. You can see, well, there's that one. So right here we have this picture here of a bee. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, has all these pollen sacs. Closer view. These are all pollen sacs, tons attached to this bee's leg, tons. All right. So here it is up closer. So we have, so every corpusculum is attached to 2 pollen sacs that comes up out of the flower. And here's another, and then you can see, this is like magnified, you can see the little pollen grains in there. Okay. Now, typically when I do this program, I do it in end of July, beginning of August, because I go and collect the common milkweed, and we take, let's see, toothpicks and magnifying glasses, and we pop these out. Okay, we can pop them out. It's really, you can pop them out, and it's very hard to put them back in the slits, but you can pop them out. Okay. All right, so here we go. Another good view of this. Here's a corpusculum. Here's the somatic slit. So in order for this pollen sac to go in, this insect has to walk around, and just by chance, if its leg goes down here, the pollen sac might get stuck in there, and when it lifts its leg up, boop, it goes right in. Do you think this is an efficient way to pollinate a flower? No, not at all. That's like so fascinating. Okay, so going on, so we have the pollination. Okay, so the neat thing about milkweed too is that when it comes to, there's types of milkweed, and we've heard all about the milkweed. Milkweed's important, but there are 15 native species of milkweed in Indiana. 15 different species. We're very familiar with the common, very familiar with our swamp, and of course the butterfly weed, which is orange, and then the world milkweed, which is the smaller yellow milkweed, the smaller white milkweed with a really thin, almost needle-like leaves. Okay, those are really small. Those are very common around here. I almost crash on 69 sometimes when I see a whole bunch of world milkweed. I'm like, world milkweed! And my husband's like, look at the road! I'm like, oh, I want to see the milkweed. So bad. So, But, so those are the 4 types. When I talk to people, I usually talk about those 4 types because people are very familiar with them, but then you can go on and on with different types of milkweed. Those are pretty common to find, easy to grow. I tell people, you know, in my zones at my house, I grow common milkweed. All right, and I'll tell you, I call them weak perennials because you plant your common milkweed in an area, it may come back about 5 years, but then it kind of does its runners, its roots underneath, and then it grows over there, like 5 feet away. Then it's over there, and then it's over there, and then it's over there, okay? So then, you know, I tell my husband, well, I have a new zone now. There, go around that. Because my zones move in my property because of the milkweed. So that's the most common one I have. I do have swamp milkweed, which is a great one if you like to mulch. Some people love to mulch. So use the swamp milkweed because they like moist soil. You can water those a lot. Do not mulch the butterfly weed, the orange one. Butterfly weed is made for more drier areas, prairie areas. You don't want to mulch that. If you mulch it, it's not going to last but maybe 2 years, maybe. Because what are you doing? You're usually watering all the other plants around that orange butterfly weed, and they don't like its feet wet at all. So I always tell people, if you're going to have to put it in a mulched area, get it away from the plants that you're watering, and don't water it all summer. Just leave it alone, and it will be a lot better. But if you're watering plants near it, remember the soil's going to be saturated underneath there and stay wet, and it does not like that. The swamp milkweed likes that. World milkweed is pretty similar to common milkweed. It seems to grow in a lot of disturbed areas, doesn't seem to mind stuff, but remember it's a lot smaller, doesn't get that much bigger, so that one's a little bit smaller, but it's a little bit pretty. I love the white little flowers on it. Another thing that I love to do, and we're actually going to do this on our Junior Naturalist Camp this year and at my adult IMN class here next month, is we're going to make cordage out of milkweed. As many of you probably know, there are 3 plants that Native Americans use to make cordage. This is rope, all right? That is milkweed, Asclepias, we had dogbane, and we had stinging nettle. Those are the 3 main plants, I'm not talking about trees, plants that you can make cordage from, okay? And when I talk about cordage, what you do, and I used to do this at Mound State Park all the time, I used to harvest tons of stinging nettle. Okay, you could harvest stinging nettle and make cordage. You want to harvest it after a few frosts and freezes, otherwise you're going to get stung by the stinging nettle. But what I would do when I worked at Mounds is I would harvest all that after about mid-November. Some volunteers, I would go down and harvest huge bundles of stinging nettle. Then I'd let it set all winter long, drying out, and in the springtime you'd go to the butterfly room and just sit there and just take the fibers off. Then we have these long fibers, and then we could do cordage. In order to do cordage, you have 2 bundles. So I'll have like, I don't know, 3 or 4 strands of the fiber. So you have 2 bundles, and then you're going to do some twisting. And how that works, and I'm just going to pretend here. So you have your 2 bundles here. You'll take this bundle over here, and you twist it away from you. Okay, so I'm twisting away. And then I'm going to bring that bundle over the other bundle, and now I'm switched. So notice that I've done 2 different ways of twisting. If I let go, they stay because they can't untwist. They're 2 different twists and they lock together. So again, you're going to twist this one away, bring it over, and then they lock. And then over here, you're going to twist this one away, just keep going over and over again. And you just keep moving them back and forth. And if you're doing it right and you let go, it shouldn't untwist. All right. And again, you can YouTube this, making milkweed cordage. You can YouTube this and they'll show you how to do it. But that's cordage, and if I'd known I was doing this program, I would bring the cordage I have. But that cordage is very, very strong. Milkweed cordage, stinging nettle cordage, and dogbane cordage. So every year I harvest the cordage, or harvest the stems, again at the end of the season. Now, there are some concerns. I had someone come to me one time after this program, and they were very concerned that I was harvesting way too much of that because a lot of our native insects use old stalks to overwinter in. They're very concerned for me. And I said, I'm not harvesting that much. I'm just harvesting a little bit out of my yard. I'm not going around everywhere and harvesting. Trust me, I have lots of zones with lots of other plants. I have lots of sticks everywhere, sticking everywhere that my husband cannot stand. So I'm just doing my milkweed. But yeah, so there is, we always want to leave the stems for the insects, but the cordage comes in handy for a lot of interpretive programs for the kids and adults, okay? So keep that, you Google that too, that's fascinating. All right, now for our World War II. This is, to me, really fascinating. I wrote down in my little handy-dandy new notebook some facts for you guys, okay? When it comes to World War II, my grandpa recently passed away a few years ago, but he specifically remembers going out during World War II when he was a kid, going along the railroad tracks and collecting milkweed pods for World War II, okay? A lot of you probably know they were collected, milkweed pods were collected to make vests for the soldiers during World War II. Because the material that used to be stuffed in the vest was from the kapok tree, which was on an island that the Japanese took over. And so we, America, could not get that material anymore because the Japanese had it. So we had to find something in America that we could use, and lo and behold, milkweed floss was the substitution and actually became better than this kapok that they always used before. It was actually better. If you take the floss, that's that, the fluff that's attached to the seed. If you take that floss and you put it in water, it floats. Because each individual shaft is hollow, okay? Each individual shaft. So next time you hold the floss, you see it flying in the air, you'll see, imagine all those different shafts are hollow, all right? So it was encouraged that there would be in newspaper articles, 2 bags save a life. So they would give all the schools empty bags, like onion bags, okay? They'd give all the schools these big, huge onion bags. They would go out, instead of learning, the kids would go out and they would try to collect all these bags full of milkweed pods because they'd get paid for it. 15 cents for a bag that wasn't dried, 20 cents for a bag that was dried. Okay, so imagine that for a school during World War II, how important that was. There's a lot of pictures, you can Google this, World War II, milkweed, such sweet pictures of school kids, pointing to the rafters of the bags hanging from the school because they're drying them for the soldiers, my dad, my grandpa's out there, I'm doing this for them. All I need is 2 bags for 1 vest. The reason it was 2 bags for 1 vest, this is why I had to write down for all the facts. So 2 bags equaled 20 pounds of ripe pods. So 2 bags full was 20 pounds of ripe pods. And it took, of the pods, okay, 1 pod, the floss inside that 1 pod would weigh about 2 grams. So let's calculate. So 1 pod, the floss only, would weigh about 2 grams, okay? You needed 1 pound of floss, 1 pound, okay, to put into a vest. So think about that, 1 pound to put into a vest. And 1 pound, it was estimated, would keep afloat a 150-pound man for 40 hours. So again, so that's 1 pound would keep a man afloat for 40 hours, 150-pound man. So you think about that, I was like, well, how many grams is a pound? I don't. So 454 grams, give or take. 454 grams equals 1 pound, okay? So you're looking at approximately 230 pods equals 1 pound of floss. So that's a lot of pods to collect. So these school kids and even poor families would go out and collect these pods, turn them in to certain areas, they'd pay them for these pods, they'd go to a facility where they would then, process this. They would keep the seed, so don't think they weren't throwing the seed, they kept the seed because they envisioned that milkweed would be the next big farm crop, okay? This was envisioned. This would be the next big farm crop. Have you ever tried to farm milkweed before? Again, what I say, it's here, and then it's there, and then it's there. It wasn't one of those that you could, tell where to grow. So it didn't become as successful as it was envisioned to keep this going. Is that if you Google milkweed and ozone damage, milkweed is actually an ozone indicator of damage because the milkweed leaf if you look at a milkweed leaf, sometimes you see beautiful green milkweed leaves, sometimes you see them dotted, sometimes you see them full of, different kinds of insects that have bitten into it. But some milkweed, you have to Google this because you have to look at the exact picture, which unfortunately I can't show you, but in between the veins of the leaf, there's a whole bunch of little black dots in between the veins. It doesn't even go over the veins, but there's a whole bunch of little tiny black dots, a vein, a whole bunch of little tiny black dots, a vein. That might be ozone damage in that area because when they're bringing in that air into the leaf, that ozone damage, whatever chemicals are in that air, is damaging that leaf, and it leaves these black dots on the leaf. It's very distinctive compared to bacteria or fungus or insect issue. You'll be able to see that on the leaf. So that's one of the indicators. Some of our professionals go out there and look for these ozone damaged milkweeds to see if there is such a thing as the ozone being damaged in that area. And then lastly, of course, we talk about different kinds of insects. Monarchs are the only ones that rely on milkweed. A milkweed colony supports so many insects. We've heard of the milkweed bug, the milkweed beetle, okay? There's a tussock moth. There's a whole group of insects that rely on our milkweed. And then of course our pollinators. They love the nectar. And that's what I love to go, and if I see a whole bunch of honeybees on my milkweed, I try to find them having the pollen sacs hanging from their legs. I take pictures of them. I love looking at, of course, all the butterflies that come to the plant too. So just having a group, just a little zone, an oasis, you will be surprised how many insects you get. And if you're lucky enough to have a more wider area, not just a circle of a zone, and my husband has allowed me to have a little back portion of my yard, so a big longer than a circle zone. I have big long strips that I mow between, and I cannot believe, I just let all kinds of things grow back there, how many beautiful dragonflies I get back there too. Because again, what's flying around there? Insects. The dragonflies are going to come, and I don't live by a lake, I don't live by a pond, I don't live by a river, but boy, I have lots of dragonflies in my little, as my husband calls it, crazy wild area. But I have tons of things out there, and I like to go out there and just look at it. I'm almost tempted to start investigating dragonflies. I have so many out there now.